High in the Appalachian Mountains, Martha Ray stood at a dusty livestock auction with her last 50 cents clutched in her weathered hand. The widow had barely enough to feed herself, let alone buy an animal. But when she saw the tiny, malnourished horse that nobody wanted, something stirred in her heart. The locals laughed and called it the world's smallest mistake. They said she'd thrown away her last hope on a creature too weak to survive the winter. But Martha saw something they didn't. She saw a fighter. She named her Penny, and together they would prove that the greatest fortunes don't come from what the world values, but from what the heart believes in. What Martha didn't know was that this 50-cent gamble would change everything. Could one tiny horse really turn a mountain widow into a millionaire? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and wood smoke through the narrow valley as Martha Ray made her way down the mountain path. Her boots, worn thin at the soles, crunched against the frost-kissed leaves. She pulled her threadbare coat tighter around her shoulders, feeling the weight of the half-dollar coin in her pocket like a stone against her hip. 3 years had passed since Samuel died. 3 years of learning to survive alone on land that had belonged to his family for generations. The cabin sat nestled against the mountainside, a weathered structure of hand-hewn logs that had sheltered Rays since before the Civil War. Martha had thought she knew hardship before Samuel's heart gave out one October morning while splitting wood. She'd been wrong. The garden that once fed them through winter had yielded less each year. Her chickens, old and few, barely produced enough eggs to trade at the general store. The cow she'd sold last spring to pay for medicine she couldn't afford anyway. Now, as November approached with its promise of bitter cold, Martha faced a truth she'd been avoiding for months. She was running out of time. The livestock auction in Ironwood Valley happened twice a year, drawing farmers and ranchers from 3 counties. Martha had no business being there. She had no money for livestock, no means to feed another mouth. But Doc Harrison had pressed the 50 cents into her palm 2 days earlier, payment for the quilt she'd sewn from flour sacks and old dresses. "Martha, this is fine work," he'd said, his eyes kind behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "My wife will treasure it." She'd wanted to refuse. Pride was about all she had left. But pride wouldn't heat the cabin or fill her stomach. She'd taken the coin, thanked him quietly, and decided to walk the 8 miles to the auction. Not to buy, just to see people, to hear voices other than her own echoing off the cabin walls. The auction yard sprawled across a muddy field, temporary pens holding cattle, goats, a few pigs. Men in overalls and work shirts clustered in groups, comparing livestock and swapping stories. Martha recognized some faces from church, others from her rare trips to town. They nodded politely, but nobody approached. Widow Ray kept to herself, always had. Folks respected that. She moved along the fence line, watching buyers examine the animals with practiced eyes. Her young bull sold for $30. A pair of breeding goats went for $12. The auctioneer's voice carried across the yard, rhythmic and rapid, calling out numbers that might as well have been in a foreign language for all the relevance they had to Martha's life. Then she saw the horse. It stood in the smallest pen at the far edge of the yard, barely bigger than a large dog. Its coat, a patchwork of brown and white, hung loose over visible ribs. The mane looked as though it had been chewed by rats. One ear drooped at an odd angle. But the eyes, those dark, liquid eyes, held an intelligence that stopped Martha in her tracks. "That there's what you call a miniature horse," said a voice beside her. She turned to find Chester Bowman, a cattle rancher who owned half the valley. He spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Or it would be, if it wasn't half-starved and sickly. Came from a bankrupt farm up north. Nobody wants it. Too small for work, too ugly for show. Martha said nothing, just watched the little horse. It watched her back. "Auctioneer's gonna sell it for whatever he can get," Chester continued. "Probably end up as dog food. Shame, really, but that's the way of things." The little horse took a tentative step toward the fence. Martha reached out slowly, letting her hand rest on the rough wood. The horse stretched its neck, sniffing her fingers. Its breath felt warm against her skin. "Don't go getting ideas, Martha," Chester said, his tone softer now. "You got enough trouble without taking on a dying animal." She knew he was right. Knew it with the practical wisdom that came from 62 years of living, most of them hard. But something in those eyes spoke to something in her. Recognition, maybe. Two creatures the world had written off, standing on opposite sides of a fence in the fading afternoon light. The auction moved to the small animal section. Martha stayed by the pen, unable to leave. The little horse pressed its nose against her palm, and she felt the tremor in its body. Cold, hunger, fear. She knew all of those intimately. "Lot number 47, the auctioneer called out. Miniature horse, female, approximately 8 years old. "As is, where is? Do I hear $5? Silence. $4? $3? The crowd had thinned. Most of the serious buyers had left with their purchases. A few men lingered, more out of habit than interest. $2 for this fine animal? Someone laughed. Martha's hand went to her pocket, fingers closing around the coin. $1. Surely somebody needs a pet for their kids. More silence. The auctioneer sighed, clearly ready to move on. "All right, folks, 50 cents and she's yours." 50 cents, and you save me the trouble of calling the renderer. Martha's heart hammered against her ribs. 50 cents. Her last 50 cents. The money she'd planned to use for lamp oil and flour. The money that stood between her and complete destitution. The little horse looked at her, and Martha saw herself reflected in those dark eyes. Unwanted. Used up. Waiting for the end, her hand rose before her mind could argue. 50 cents, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The auctioneer squinted in her direction. Did someone bid? 50 cents, Martha repeated, louder this time. Sold to the lady in the back. Congratulations, ma'am. You just bought yourself the world's smallest horse. Laughter rippled through the remaining crowd. Martha felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her eyes on the animal. She'd made her choice, foolish as it was. Chester Bowman shook his head as he walked past. You're gonna regret that, Martha. That thing won't last the winter. Maybe he was right. Probably he was right. But Martha had spent 3 years regretting things. Regretting that she hadn't told Samuel she loved him more often. Regretting that they'd never had children. Regretting every small joy she'd denied herself because it seemed impractical or foolish. For once, just this once, she'd done something that made no sense except to her heart. She approached the pen slowly. The little horse stood perfectly still, as though understanding something important had just happened. Martha opened the gate and stepped inside. Up close, the animal looked even worse. Patches of fur were missing, revealing skin marked with old scars. The hooves needed trimming desperately. Come on then, Martha said softly. Let's go home. She'd expected resistance, but the horse followed her out of the pen without hesitation. Someone had tied a frayed rope around its neck as a makeshift lead. Martha took it gently, feeling the roughness of the hemp against her palm. The walk back up the mountain took nearly 3 hours. Martha moved slowly, aware that the little horse struggled to keep pace. Several times she stopped to let the animal rest. During one of these pauses, sitting on a fallen log while the horse grazed on sparse grass, Martha realized she'd been calling the animal she without confirmation. She examined the horse more carefully. Yes, a mare, small even for a miniature horse, probably not more than 30 inches at the shoulder. The poor thing had been through something terrible. Martha could see it in the way she startled at sudden movements, in the way her ears swiveled constantly, alert for danger. You need a name, Martha said. The horse's ears pricked forward. Something that fits. Something that reminds me why I did this crazy thing. She pulled the $50 from her pocket, the coin she'd surrendered for this animal. 50 cents. 2 quarters, 4 bits. A penny was the smallest coin, worth almost nothing by itself. But enough pennies could add up to something. Could add up to everything. Penny, Martha said. I'll call you Penny. The horse nickered softly, and Martha chose to believe it was approval. They reached the cabin just as the sun dipped below the western ridge. The familiar sight brought a mix of comfort and concern. Home, yes, but now home to 2 hungry mouths instead of 1. The small barn where Samuel had once kept their cow and the mule stood empty, its door hanging crooked on rusted hinges. Martha led Penny inside, grateful at least for shelter. The barn smelled of dust and old hay. Martha found a corner with relatively clean straw and spread it thick for bedding. She filled a bucket from the spring and set it where Penny could reach. The horse drank deeply, then looked at Martha with an expression that seemed almost grateful. Food was the next problem. Martha had nothing suitable for a horse. She'd planned to use her 50 cents for flour and lamp oil, necessities she couldn't do without. Now she had neither money nor supplies, but she did have the garden, what little remained of it. She gathered the last of the turnip greens, some withered carrots too small to be worth much, and a handful of windfall apples from the gnarled tree behind the cabin. Penny ate everything Martha offered, though slowly, as if her stomach had forgotten how to process food properly. Martha watched, stroking the matted mane, feeling the sharp angles of bone beneath the rough coat. This animal had been starved, neglected, probably abused. The thought made something hard and angry form in Martha's chest. "We're going to get through this," she whispered. "Both of us." It was full dark by the time Martha returned to the cabin. She lit her last candle and sat at the table Samuel had built 30 years ago, trying to inventory what she had. The root cellar held enough potatoes and preserves to last maybe 2 more weeks. The chickens would give her eggs for trade, but not many. She had firewood, thank God. Samuel had cut and stacked enough to see her through winter before he died. But food. She needed food for herself and now for Penny. The horse couldn't survive on garden scraps. She needed proper feed, hay, grain, things that cost money Martha didn't have. She thought about her neighbors scattered across the mountain. The Hendersons, who'd lost their son in the war. The McKinley family, struggling with 5 children and a failed tobacco crop. The Pratts, whose daughter had married and moved to the city, leaving the old couple alone on their farm. Everyone had their own burdens. She couldn't ask for charity, but she could work. Martha had skills. She could sew, cook, clean. She could preserve food, tend gardens, care for the sick. She'd helped birth half the babies in the valley over the years, though never been paid for it. Maybe it was time to change that. Not asking for handouts, asking for work. The candle burned low. Martha extinguished it carefully, saving what remained. She climbed into bed, still wearing her clothes for warmth, pulling the quilt Samuel's mother had made up to her chin. Outside, she heard Penny moving in the barn. The small sounds of another living creature nearby brought an unexpected comfort. She'd been so alone. She hadn't realized how much the silence weighed on her until it was broken. Sleep came slowly. Her mind turned over possibilities, plans, worries. But underneath it all ran a thread of something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Fragile as spider silk, easily broken, but there nonetheless. Martha woke before dawn, as she always did. The cold bit hard, promising the first real freeze soon. She dressed quickly and went to check on Penny. The little horse stood in her corner of the barn, covered in the old blanket Martha had brought out during the night. Their eyes met, and Martha felt again that strange connection, that sense of recognition. "Morning," she said softly. Penny nickered in response. Martha checked the water bucket. Empty. She refilled it from the spring, breaking a thin skin of ice on the surface. The horse drank gratefully. Martha examined her more carefully in the pale morning light. The ribs still showed, the coat still hung in patches, but something in the horse's bearing seemed different. Stronger, maybe. More present. "You're a fighter," Martha said. "I could see that yesterday." "That's good. We're both going to need to fight." She left Penny with more apple scraps and headed down the mountain to the McKinley farm. Sarah McKinley answered the door with a baby on her hip and flour on her apron. "Martha," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "This is unexpected." "I've come to offer my services," Martha said, keeping her voice steady. "I know you've got your hands full with the children and the harvest coming in. I can help with cooking, cleaning, minding the little ones." "Whatever you need." Sarah's expression softened. "Martha, you don't have to—" "I do," Martha interrupted gently. "I need work, Sarah, honest work. I can't pay you with money, but I can pay with labor. If you could spare some hay, maybe a bit of grain, it would be appreciated." Understanding dawned on Sarah's face. The whole valley would have heard about the auction by now. News traveled fast in small communities. You really bought that little horse?" "I did." Sarah shifted the baby to her other hip. "Tom said you'd lost your mind." "But then Tom says that about most things." She smiled slightly. "I could use help, truth be told. The preserving's not done, and with the children underfoot, it's near impossible to get anything finished. If you could come 2 days a week, I'd be grateful. We've got hay from last season that's gone a bit musty." "Horse won't mind that, and I can spare some oats." Relief flooded through Martha. "Thank you, Sarah." "Don't thank me. You'll earn every bit of it. My children are holy terrors." Martha spent the next 2 days at the McKinley farm, working from dawn until dusk. She canned tomatoes, pickled cucumbers, made apple butter, and watched the children while Sarah and Tom brought in the last of the corn. It was hard work, but good work. Work that had purpose and end and reward. She returned home the second evening with a bundle of hay strapped to her back and a small sack of oats. Penny greeted her with what Martha could only describe as enthusiasm. The little horse actually pranced in place, her tail swishing. "You're feeling better," Martha said, laughing. It felt strange, that sound. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed. She fed Penny the oats, mixed with water to make them easier to digest, then sat on an upturned bucket, watching the horse eat. In just 2 days, Penny looked different. Not healed, not healthy yet, but different. The dull coat showed hints of shine. The eyes held less wariness. Over the following weeks, Martha established a routine. She worked for the McKinleys, the Hendersons, and the Pratts, trading labor for feed and small amounts of food. She mended clothes, cleaned houses, helped with harvests. The work was exhausting, but it kept her and Penny fed. And Penny changed, slowly at first, then more noticeably. The ribs began to disappear under a layer of healthy flesh. The coat grew in thick and glossy, revealing beautiful dappling Martha hadn't seen beneath the grime. The hooves, which Martha had learned to trim by watching Tom McKinley work with his horses, grew strong and even. But it was Penny's personality that surprised Martha most. The little horse was smart, frighteningly smart. She learned to unlatch the barn door within a week, forcing Martha to add a more complex lock. She followed Martha around like a dog, never more than a few steps away, and she seemed to understand words, responding to Martha's voice with uncanny accuracy. One morning in late November, Martha woke to find Penny standing outside the cabin door. The horse had somehow escaped the barn and navigated the rocky path in the dark. When Martha emerged, confused and alarmed, Penny nudged her insistently toward the barn. The barn door hung open. Inside, one of Martha's chickens lay on the ground, its wing bent at an odd angle. A fox, probably, though it had fled when Penny escaped and raised the alarm. "You saved her," Martha said, looking at the little horse with wonder. Penny nickered, as if to say it was nothing special. Martha splinted the chicken's wing and moved all the birds into a more secure coop. But the incident stuck with her. Penny wasn't just smart. She was protective, alert, a guardian in a tiny package. Winter settled over the mountain with its usual harsh beauty. Snow came early and deep. Martha's work dried up as families hunkered down for the cold months. She and Penny survived on stored food, on the careful rationing Martha had learned in harder times. They spent long evenings in the barn together, Martha sitting on her bucket, Penny standing close, both of them sharing warmth and silence. It was during those quiet winter nights that Martha began to talk to Penny, really talk, the way she'd once talked to Samuel. She told stories about her childhood, about meeting Samuel at a church social, about the life they'd built together. She spoke of her fears, her loneliness, her regrets. And Penny listened, those intelligent eyes never leaving Martha's face. The blizzard came in mid-January, the worst anyone could remember in 20 years. Snow fell for 3 days straight, piling up past the cabin windows, turning the world into a featureless white void. Martha and Penny huddled in the barn, which offered better insulation than the drafty cabin. Martha had moved her bedroll in, along with what food she could carry. On the third night, as the wind howled like a living thing, Martha heard something that didn't belong to the storm. A voice, faint, distant, but unmistakably human. She moved to the barn door, peering into the darkness. Snow swirled so thick she could barely see 5 feet ahead. The voice came again, weaker this time. A cry for help. Someone was out there, lost in the storm. Martha's first instinct was practical. Going out in this weather was suicide. She'd freeze before she found whoever was calling. The smart thing, the sensible thing, was to stay put, wait for the storm to pass. But the voice came again, and Martha thought of Samuel, thought of how she'd found him too late, his body already cold in the woodshed. She grabbed her coat, wrapped a scarf around her face, and stepped into the blizzard. The wind hit her like a fist, stealing her breath. She called out, straining to hear a response. Nothing but wind. Then Penny pushed past her into the storm. No! Martha reached for the horse, but Penny was already moving, trotting into the whiteout with purpose. Martha had no choice but to follow. She kept one hand on Penny's flank, using the little horse as an anchor against the wind. Penny moved with confidence, navigating through snow that came up to her chest. How she knew where to go, Martha couldn't fathom. But the horse had a direction, a destination. Martha trusted her. They found the boy 15 minutes later, though it felt like hours. He'd collapsed against a fallen tree, barely visible beneath the snow. 12, maybe 13 years old, dressed in inadequate clothes, his lips blue with cold. Martha recognized him immediately. Tommy Pratt, the grandson who'd come to stay with his grandparents after his mother died. Tommy, Martha shook him gently. His eyes flickered open, unfocused. Can you stand? He couldn't. Martha tried to lift him, but he was dead weight, and she didn't have the strength. Panic rose in her throat. They couldn't stay here. They'd all freeze, but she couldn't carry him, and she couldn't leave him. Penny nudged Martha's shoulder, then positioned herself next to the boy. The meaning was clear. Martha stared at the little horse, at the boy, understanding flooding through her. It was impossible. Penny was too small, but she was also their only chance. Martha heaved Tommy across Penny's back. The boy lay draped over the horse like a sack of grain, barely conscious. Penny's legs trembled under the weight, but she held steady. Martha grabbed the makeshift lead rope, and they began the journey back. It took forever. Penny struggled with every step, but she never stopped, never faltered. Martha walked beside her, one hand on the boy to keep him from sliding off, the other gripping Penny's mane. The barn appeared through the snow like a miracle. Inside, Martha pulled Tommy off Penny's back and wrapped him in every blanket she had. She built up the fire in the small stove, rubbing the boy's hands and feet to restore circulation. Penny stood nearby, sides heaving, coat covered in ice. "You saved him," Martha whispered, looking at the exhausted horse. "You saved us both. Tommy Pratt survived." When the storm finally broke 2 days later, Martha sent word down the mountain. The boy's grandparents arrived with the doctor, tears streaming down their weathered faces. Tommy had wandered away from their cabin, gotten turned around in the whiteout. They'd thought him dead. "Martha Ray, you're a hero," Dr. Harrison said, examining Tommy with professional thoroughness. "How did you find him in that storm?" Martha looked at Penny, who stood in the corner of the barn, munching hay as if she'd done nothing remarkable. "I had help." The story spread faster than the previous rumors of Martha's foolishness. The widow who'd bought the worthless horse had saved Tommy Pratt's life. More specifically, the little horse had saved Tommy's life. People began stopping by the cabin, ostensibly to check on Martha, but really to see Penny. Chester Bowman came in February, hat in hand, looking sheepish. "I said some things at that auction. Things I shouldn't have said." Martha poured him coffee from her precious supply, a gift from Sarah McKinley. "You said what everyone was thinking." "I was wrong." Chester looked out the window to where Penny grazed on the sparse winter grass. "That's no ordinary horse, Martha. There's something special about her. Special." The word echoed in Martha's mind long after Chester left. She'd known Penny was intelligent, loyal, brave, but special implied something more, something that made Martha both hopeful and afraid. Hope, because maybe this crazy decision she'd made might lead somewhere good. Afraid, because good things had a way of being taken from her. In March, a stranger appeared at Martha's door. He wore a suit too fine for mountain travel, and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being important. Behind him stood a younger man with a camera. "Mrs. Ray, my name is Harrison Cole. I'm a reporter for the Nashville Chronicle," He offered his hand, which Martha shook cautiously. "I'm here about your horse." "What about her?" "The story's made its way to Nashville. A miniature horse that rescued a boy in a blizzard. Our readers would love to hear about it. Would you mind if we did an interview? Maybe took some photographs?" Martha's first instinct was to refuse. She didn't want attention, didn't want strangers poking into her life. But then she thought about the hay in the barn, running low again, about the salt pork she needed to buy, about the roof that leaked in 3 places. "What's in it for me?" she asked bluntly. Cole smiled. "Direct, I appreciate that. We'd pay you $50 for your time and the exclusive story." $50. 100 times what she'd paid for Penny. Martha thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "Come in." The interview took all afternoon. Cole asked about the rescue, about how Martha came to own Penny, about life on the mountain. The photographer took picture after picture of Penny, who seemed to understand she was performing, and held her head high, showing off her now glossy coat and intelligent eyes. "This is going to be a big story, Mrs. Ray," Cole said as they prepared to leave. "People love stories like this. The underdog, the unexpected hero. Don't be surprised if you get more visitors." He had no idea how right he was. The article ran 2 weeks later. Martha didn't see it herself until Sarah McKinley brought a copy up the mountain, her face flushed with excitement. The headline read, "Mountain Widow's 50-cent horse saves boy's life. The remarkable story of Penny the miniature horse." The photograph showed Martha standing beside Penny, both of them looking directly at the camera. Martha barely recognized herself. She looked thinner than she remembered, older, but there was something in her eyes she hadn't seen in years. Pride, maybe, or purpose. "You're famous," Sarah said, laughing. "Half the county's talking about you." Famous. Martha didn't want to be famous. She wanted to be left alone with her horse, to survive quietly through whatever years remained to her. But fame, it turned out, had its own momentum. The letters started arriving within days. People from across Tennessee writing to express admiration, to ask about Penny, to share their own stories of remarkable animals. Most included small amounts of money, $1 here, $5 there. "For Penny's care," they wrote. "Father Hero horse." Then came the visitors. At first, just a few curious locals who'd read the article and wanted to see Penny for themselves. But then people from farther away. Families who made the trek up the mountain with children eager to meet the famous horse. Photographers, more reporters. Martha found herself in an impossible position. She needed the money the attention brought, the gifts of food and supplies, the cash donations. But she also needed her privacy, her quiet life. And Penny, for all her remarkable qualities, was still just a horse who needed rest and routine. It was during this chaotic period that Martha met Elizabeth Thornton. Elizabeth arrived on a Tuesday morning in late April, driving a black automobile up the rough mountain road. Martha watched from the porch as the woman emerged, dressed in practical but expensive clothing, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She moved with the grace of someone half her age. "Mrs. Ray." The woman's voice carried authority tempered with kindness. "I'm Elizabeth Thornton. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I've come a long way to meet you and Penny." Martha had grown wary of visitors, especially well-dressed ones who arrived in automobiles. They usually wanted something. "If you're another reporter, I'm not interested." "I'm not a reporter," Elizabeth smiled. "I run an organization called the American Miniature Horse Association. We work to preserve and promote the breed. When I read about Penny, I knew I had to meet her." "She's just a horse," Martha said, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't quite true. "May I see her?" Something in Elizabeth's manner suggested genuine interest rather than mere curiosity. Martha led her to the barn where Penny dozed in a patch of sunlight. The little horse looked up as they entered, immediately alert. Elizabeth approached slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. She examined Penny with expert hands, checking her conformation, her teeth, her hooves. When she finally stepped back, her expression was thoughtful. "Mrs. Ray, do you know what you have here? A miniature horse. You just said so yourself. Not just any miniature horse. Penny's bloodline is exceptional. Look at her proportions, the refinement of her features, the intelligence in her eyes. With proper training, she could be a champion show horse. Martha laughed, a bitter sound. A champion? She's a half-starved rescue I bought for 50 cents. That's how she started. But look at her now. Elizabeth gestured to Penny, who stood proud in her stall, coat gleaming, eyes bright. She's transformed. And more than that, she's proven herself capable of remarkable things. The rescue of that boy wasn't just luck. It showed intelligence, courage, empathy. Those are rare qualities in any animal. What exactly are you proposing? Elizabeth pulled a folded paper from her pocket. I'd like to register Penny with our association. Get her properly documented, entered in our breeding registry. And then, if you're willing, I'd like to train her for the show circuit. Show circuit? Martha shook her head. That sounds expensive and complicated. I'm just an old woman trying to survive. I'm not asking you to pay anything. I'd cover all expenses. Training, travel, everything. In exchange, I'd take a percentage of any prize money Penny wins. But the rest would be yours. Martha studied Elizabeth's face, looking for deception or hidden motives. She found only earnest enthusiasm. Why would you do that? Because I believe in preserving quality bloodlines. Because I think Penny could be extraordinary. And because, Elizabeth's expression softened, I read your story, Martha. All of it. The life you've lived, the struggles you've faced. You took a chance on an animal nobody wanted. I'd like to take a chance on both of you. It should have been an easy decision. Money, opportunity, the chance for something better. But Martha had learned that easy opportunities usually came with hidden costs. I need to think about it. Of course, Elizabeth handed her a business card. Take all the time you need. But Martha, consider this. Penny saved that boy because you gave her a chance when no one else would. Maybe it's time someone gave you both a chance at something more. After Elizabeth left, Martha sat in the barn with Penny for a long time. The little horse nuzzled her shoulder, content and calm. Martha thought about the past months, about how her life had changed since that day at the auction. She'd expected to save Penny, hadn't realized Penny would save her right back. She called Elizabeth 3 days later. I'll do it. But I have conditions. Name them. Penny stays with me. Whatever training happens, it happens here on the mountain. I won't send her away. Agreed. I'll arrange for a trainer to come to you. And if at any point I feel this isn't right for her, we stop. No arguments. You have my word. The trainer arrived 2 weeks later. His name was Marcus Webb, a quiet man in his 30s with gentle hands and infinite patience. He set up camp in Martha's barn, sleeping in the loft and working with Penny every day. Martha watched the training sessions with mixed feelings. Marcus taught Penny to move in specific patterns, to hold her head at particular angles, to stand perfectly still for inspection. The little horse learned quickly, seeming to enjoy the challenge. But Martha worried about pushing her too hard, about turning something natural and free into something manufactured for human entertainment. She's happy, Marcus said one evening, apparently sensing Martha's concern. Look at her eyes. She loves learning. Some horses resist training, fight every step. Penny leans into it. She wants to please. That's what worries me. What if we take advantage of that? Marcus sat on the fence rail, considering. There's a difference between partnership and exploitation. I never force a horse to do something that harms them. The movements we're teaching Penny are natural to her. We're just refining them, giving them structure. And look at her condition. She's thriving. It was true. Penny had filled out beautifully under Marcus's care. Her coat shone like polished wood. Her muscles, once non-existent, now rippled beneath her skin. She moved with confidence and grace. But the real test came in June, when Elizabeth arranged for Penny's first show. The county fairgrounds sprawled across a valley 20 miles away. Martha had never been to a horse show, didn't know what to expect. The sight that greeted her made her stomach clench with anxiety. Dozens of horses, all miniature breeds, stood in temporary stalls. Their owners, dressed in expensive clothes, fussed over their animals with brushes and ribbons. Everyone seemed to know everyone else. They spoke a language of bloodlines and championships, of points and placements. Martha felt completely out of her depth. "Don't worry," Elizabeth said, appearing at her elbow. "You're not here to impress them. You're here to show them what Penny can do." The competition had several categories. Halter class, where horses were judged on conformation and breed standards. Liberty class, where they performed without a lead rope. Obstacle course, testing intelligence and obedience. Elizabeth had entered Penny in all three. The halter class came first. Marcus led Penny into the ring, and Martha's heart swelled with pride despite her nervousness. Her little horse, once skeletal and filthy, now stood among purebred champions. Penny held her head high, her gait smooth and measured. The judge, an elderly woman with sharp eyes, examined each horse carefully. When she reached Penny, she stopped, really looked, ran her hands over Penny's legs, checked her teeth, studied her proportions. Martha held her breath. "Remarkable," the judge murmured, barely loud enough to hear. Penny took third place. Not first, but for a 50-cent rescue competing against $1,000 bloodlines, third place felt like a miracle. The Liberty class went better. Penny performed beautifully, responding to Marcus's commands with precision and grace. She seemed to understand the crowd watching, playing to them with subtle showmanship. Second place. Then came the obstacle course. The course consisted of various challenges. Weaving through poles, stepping over logs, navigating a narrow bridge, backing through a tight space. Most horses needed guidance, their trainers calling encouragement and directions. Penny ran the course perfectly. Not just perfectly, joyfully. She attacked each obstacle with enthusiasm, her small hooves dancing over the challenges. When she finished, the crowd erupted in applause. First place. Martha found herself surrounded by people, all wanting to talk about Penny, to learn her story, to ask questions. It was overwhelming. She finally escaped to the barn where Penny rested in her temporary stall, munching hay contentedly. "You did good, girl," Martha whispered, stroking Penny's nose. The horse nickered softly, leaning into the touch. "She's special, isn't she?" A woman's voice. Martha turned to find a stranger standing nearby, probably in her 50s, dressed in riding clothes that had seen better days. "I'm Rebecca Chen. I run a therapeutic riding program for disabled children about 40 miles from here." "Martha Ray, I know who you are. Everyone here knows your story." Rebecca moved closer, watching Penny with professional interest. "I saw her on that obstacle course. The way she moved, the intelligence she showed. Has anyone ever suggested using her for therapy work?" "Therapy? Miniature horses make excellent therapy animals. Their size makes them less intimidating than full-sized horses, especially for children. And Penny's temperament, from what I've seen, would be perfect. Patient, gentle, smart." Martha frowned. "She's already doing the show circuit." "Elizabeth has plans. I'm not suggesting it replace the shows. Just an occasional visit. The joy these animals bring to children who are struggling, it's remarkable. Life-changing sometimes." Rebecca pulled out a card. "Think about it. If you're ever interested, call me. 2 opportunities in as many months." Martha felt pulled in different directions. The shows brought money and recognition. But therapy work, helping children, that spoke to something deeper. She discussed it with Elizabeth over dinner that night, a celebration of Penny's success at a local restaurant. Elizabeth listened carefully, then nodded slowly. "It's a good idea. Actually, it could help Penny's reputation. Show that she's not just a performer, but a genuine helper. Good publicity." Martha bristled at the word publicity. She didn't want to use children for marketing purposes. But then she thought about Tommy Pratt, about how Penny had saved him. If the little horse could bring that kind of hope to other children, didn't Martha have an obligation to let her try? "I'll contact Rebecca," Martha said. "But only if it's right for Penny, not for publicity." "Of course," Elizabeth agreed, though something in her tone suggested she was already calculating the media value. The summer passed in a blur of shows and training. Penny won more ribbons, more prizes. The money helped, certainly. Martha repaired her roof, restocked her pantry, even bought new clothes for the first time in years. But the shows themselves left her conflicted. She watched other owners treat their horses like commodities, valuable only for what they could win. She saw animals pushed too hard, disciplined too harshly, valued only for their performance. It made her sick. Marcus assured her that Penny was different, that their approach was different, and it was true that Penny seemed happy. But Martha couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading somewhere dangerous, that the more successful Penny became, the more people would want to own her, control her, use her. In late August, Rebecca called. "I have a situation. One of my regular therapy horses is injured. Nothing serious, but she needs rest. I have a 12-year-old girl coming tomorrow who's been looking forward to her session for weeks. She has cerebral palsy and severe anxiety. Is there any chance Penny could visit?" Martha said yes before thinking it through. She loaded Penny into the trailer Elizabeth had provided and drove the 40 miles to Rebecca's facility. The drive felt longer than it was, Martha's nerves building with each mile. Rebecca's place was modest, a small barn and riding ring on a few acres of land. Simple but well-maintained. The girl, whose name was Sophie, waited in a wheelchair, her mother standing protectively nearby. Sophie's face lit up when she saw Penny. "She's so small." "She's perfect." Rebecca handled the introduction professionally, letting Sophie and Penny get acquainted slowly. The little horse, as if understanding the girl's fragility, moved with exceptional gentleness. She let Sophie touch her mane, her nose, her sides, standing perfectly still. "Can I walk with her?" Sophie asked. "Let's try," Rebecca said. With help, Sophie stood supported by a walker. Penny walked beside her, matching the girl's slow, unsteady pace. Around the ring they went, Sophie concentrating fiercely on each step, Penny patient as stone. By the end of the session, Sophie was laughing. Martha couldn't remember the last time she'd heard a sound so pure, so full of uncomplicated joy. "Thank you," Sophie's mother said, tears streaming down her face. "You don't know what this means." She's been so withdrawn lately, so discouraged. This is the first time in months I've seen her smile like that. On the drive home, Martha made a decision. The shows were fine, the money was necessary. But this, helping children like Sophie, this mattered more. She would find a way to balance both, no matter what Elizabeth wanted. She arrived home to find the expensive car parked outside her cabin. A man in a business suit stood on her porch, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the rustic surroundings. "Mrs. Ray, my name is Vincent Carroll. I represent the National Entertainment Agency out of Los Angeles. I'd like to talk to you about Penny." Martha's exhaustion from the long day made her patience thin. "What about her?" "We'd like to make her a star. Television appearances, advertisements, maybe even a movie. The public loves her story. We could make you both wealthy beyond your wildest dreams." "Not interested." Martha moved to push past him, but he blocked her path. "Mrs. Ray, I don't think you understand the opportunity here. We're talking about millions of dollars. Real security for your future." I said no. "At least think about it. Here's my card. The offer won't last forever. Someone else will recognize Penny's potential, and then you'll regret turning this down." After he left, Martha sat on her porch in the gathering darkness, Penny grazing nearby. Millions of dollars, security, everything she'd struggled without for years. But at what cost? Penny would become a commodity, a product owned by people who saw only dollar signs. No amount of money was worth that. Elizabeth called the next morning, having somehow already heard about Carol's visit. You should have taken his offer. He wanted to own her, turn her into something she's not. Martha, be practical. You're not getting any younger. What happens to Penny if something happens to you? This could secure both your futures. We'll figure it out. You're being stubborn. I'm being protective. There's a difference. The conversation ended badly, with Elizabeth frustrated and Martha exhausted. She'd thought Elizabeth understood, that they were partners with Penny's best interests at heart. Now she wondered if Elizabeth saw Penny the same way Carol did, just with better packaging. The realization left her hollow. She'd let people into her life, let herself depend on them, trust them. And now she was learning the same lesson she'd learned after Samuel died. In the end, you could only rely on yourself, except for Penny. The little horse had never let her down, never wanted anything except to be with her. In a world of complex motivations and hidden agendas, Penny's loyalty was pure and simple. Martha made another decision that night. No more shows for a while. No more training sessions with Marcus. Just her and Penny, living quietly on the mountain, maybe doing occasional therapy visits for children who needed them. She'd returned to her old life, enriched now by the little horse's presence, but fundamentally unchanged. She called Elizabeth the next day to explain. The conversation went about as well as expected. "You're making a mistake," Elizabeth said coldly. "Penny has potential you're wasting. Penny has a life she deserves to live. On her terms, not ours. Then I'm done. I've invested time and money in this venture, and if you're backing out, I'm cutting my losses." "I understand." Martha hung up, feeling surprisingly calm. She'd made the right choice. She knew it in her bones. Marcus stayed another week to finish up some business, then packed his truck and prepared to leave. "For what it's worth," he said, shaking Martha's hand, "I think you're right. Penny's special, but not in the way Elizabeth thinks. The world doesn't need another show horse, but it needs more horses like Penny, who make people remember what really matters." After he left, Martha and Penny settled back into their routine. The summer crowds dwindled. The reporters stopped calling. Life returned to something resembling normal. But everything had changed. Martha had money saved now, enough to see her through several hard winters. She had connections, people who knew her name, who might offer work or help if needed, and she had proof that sometimes the craziest decisions turn out to be the wisest ones. Autumn came again, a full year since Martha had bought Penny at that dusty auction. The anniversary passed quietly, marked only by Martha sitting in the barn with a small apple cake she'd baked. She gave half to Penny, kept half for herself. "Happy anniversary, girl," she said, watching the little horse eat. "Best 50 cents I ever spent." The therapy work with Rebecca's program continued and expanded. Word spread about the remarkable miniature horse who seemed to understand exactly what each child needed. Penny was gentle with the frightened, playful with the withdrawn, patient with the struggling. She adapted to each situation with uncanny awareness. Martha drove her to the facility twice a week now, staying to help with the sessions. She found satisfaction in the work that the shows had never provided. These children didn't care about Penny's conformation or her bloodlines. They cared that she was soft and warm, that she didn't judge them, that she made them feel capable and loved. One October morning, Martha woke to find Penny acting strangely. The little horse paced her stall, nickering anxiously, refusing to eat. Martha checked her over carefully, finding no obvious injury or illness. But something was clearly wrong. "What is it, girl?" "What are you trying to tell me?" Penny moved to the barn door, then back to Martha, then to the door again. The pattern was clear. She wanted Martha to follow her somewhere. They set out into the cool morning, Penny leading the way down an unfamiliar trail that skirted the edge of Martha's property. The path grew rougher, climbing through thick underbrush. Martha's knees ached, her breath coming hard. But Penny pressed on with purpose. They found the dog in a narrow ravine, caught in old barbed wire, its leg trapped and bleeding. A hunting dog, judging by the collar, probably lost from one of the neighboring properties. It watched their approach with frightened eyes, too weak to bark. "Easy now," Martha spoke softly, approaching slowly. The dog growled more from fear than aggression. Martha had helped birth half the children in the valley and doctored more animals than she could count. She knew how to handle a frightened creature. It took an hour to free the dog, carefully cutting away the wire while Penny stood guard, somehow calming the animal with her presence. Martha bandaged the leg with strips torn from her shirt, then half-carried, half-dragged the dog back to the cabin. She recognized the collar tag immediately. The dog belonged to Dale Winters, a hunter who lived 5 miles away. Martha had no phone, so she walked to the McKinley farm and asked to use theirs. Dale arrived within the hour, his face drawn with worry. "Rex has been missing for 3 days. Odd about giving up hope." He looked at the bandaged dog, then at Martha, then at Penny, standing quietly nearby. "How did you find him?" "I didn't, Penny did." Dale shook his head in wonder. "That's the second person that horse has saved. Maybe the third, if you count yourself." After Dale left, taking Rex home for proper veterinary care, Martha sat on her porch thinking about his words. Saving people. Was that what Penny did? Or was she simply responding to situations as they arose, the way any intelligent, compassionate creature might? But the incidents kept happening. In November, Penny alerted Martha to a gas leak in the cabin that Martha's aging nose hadn't detected. In December, she woke Martha in the night, insistent and urgent, leading her outside just before a heavy snow load collapsed part of the barn roof, right where Martha's bedroll had been. The neighbors started calling Penny a guardian angel. Martha didn't believe in angels, but she couldn't deny that the little horse seemed to sense danger in ways that defied normal explanation. It was as if Penny had appointed herself Martha's protector and took the job seriously. Winter settled in hard. Martha and Penny spent long evenings by the fire, Martha reading aloud from the books she'd accumulated over the years. Penny seemed to enjoy the sound of her voice, would rest her head on Martha's lap while the older woman read. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Martha first voiced the thought that had been growing in her mind for months. "I'm getting old, Penny, older than I feel comfortable admitting. What happens to you when I'm gone?" The little horse raised her head, those intelligent eyes fixed on Martha's face. "I've been thinking about it a lot. You're young still, only 9 or 10 if the vet estimated right. You could live another 20 years. But I won't." The words hurt to say, but they were true. Martha was 63. Her body ached more each year. Her eyesight was failing. She was strong for her age, but age was catching up regardless. "I need to make sure you're taken care of, but not by just anyone. Not someone who'll see you as valuable because of what you can do or what you're worth. Someone who'll value you for what you are." The problem occupied Martha's thoughts constantly. She couldn't leave Penny to the state or to chance. But who could she trust? Elizabeth had proven herself more interested in profit than in Penny's welfare. The show circuit people saw horses as investments. Even well-meaning folks like Rebecca had their own interests and limitations. In January, the solution presented itself in an unexpected form. A young woman appeared at Martha's door on a bitter cold morning. She wore worn jeans and a patched coat. Her truck held together more by rust and prayer than engineering. But her eyes were kind, and she moved with the easy grace of someone comfortable with physical work. "Mrs. Ray, I'm Annie Chen, Rebecca's daughter. She sent me to ask if you needed any help around the place. I'm good with repairs, and Mom said you mentioned your porch was sagging." Martha had mentioned it months ago as an offhand comment. She hadn't expected anyone to remember, much less offer help. "I can't pay you. Didn't ask for pay. Mom says you've been volunteering with her program for months now, refusing any compensation. Figure the least we can do is help you out a bit." Martha studied the young woman. Mid-20s maybe, with calloused hands and an honest face. "You know anything about carpentry?" "My dad was a contractor before he died. Taught me everything he knew." They spent the morning working on the porch, Annie demonstrating genuine skill while Martha assisted where she could. Penny watched from the yard, curious about the stranger but unafraid. "That's the famous horse," Annie said during a break, accepting the coffee Martha offered. "Mom talks about her all the time. Says she's the best therapy animal she's ever seen." "She's special," Martha agreed. "Mom also says you turned down a lot of money to keep Penny out of the spotlight." "That took courage," Martha shrugged. "Just seemed like the right thing to do." They worked together for 3 more days, repairing the porch, fixing the barn door, replacing several rotted boards in the cabin's floor. Annie refused any payment, but accepted meals and seemed genuinely happy to help. She was good with Penny, too, respectful but affectionate, never pushing too hard or expecting too much. On the last day, as Annie prepared to leave, Martha made a decision. "Annie, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. What are your plans?" "For the future, I mean." Annie laughed, though there was little humor in it. "Surviving, mostly. I work odd jobs. Do repairs for folks who can't afford proper contractors. Get by. You ever think about working with horses? Used to ride when I was younger. Haven't had the money or opportunity lately." Martha took a deep breath. "I need someone I can trust. Someone who could take care of Penny if something happens to me. Would you be interested in learning? I can't pay much, but I could provide meals, maybe a small salary once tax season comes, and I get my refund." Annie's expression turned serious. "You barely know me. I know enough. You're honest, you work hard, and Penny likes you. That's more than I can say for most people. Can I think about it?" "Of course." Take all the time you need. Annie showed up 2 days later with a duffel bag. If the offer's still open, I'd like to accept. Martha showed her to the small room off the kitchen that had once been Samuel's workshop. It wasn't much, just space for a bed and a dresser, but Annie seemed genuinely grateful. I'll work hard, she promised. Won't let you down. And she didn't. Annie threw herself into learning everything Martha could teach her about Penny's care, about the mountain, about survival in harsh conditions. She was a quick study, asked good questions, and showed genuine affection for the little horse. But more than that, she brought life back to the cabin. Martha hadn't realized how much she'd missed having another person around until Annie arrived. They fell into an easy rhythm, sharing chores and meals, talking in the evenings about everything and nothing. "Why did you really come here?" Martha asked one night, weeks after Annie's arrival. "A young woman like you could find better opportunities than nursemaiding an old widow and a horse." Annie was quiet for a long moment. "My dad died 2 years ago. Cancer. Mom threw herself into the therapy program, and I understood that, but it left me kind of adrift. Then she told me about you and Penny, about what you'd done for the kids in her program. I wanted to be part of something that mattered. This matters. It's not glamorous work. I don't need glamorous. I need purpose." Martha understood that better than Annie probably realized. Purpose was what Penny had given her, what had kept her going through the hardest winter of her life. Spring came, then summer. Annie proved herself invaluable, not just with Penny, but with everything. She expanded the garden, repaired the chicken coop, negotiated better prices at the general store. Martha found herself able to relax for the first time in years, knowing the burden of survival was shared. The therapy work expanded again. Rebecca now had requests from 3 different facilities wanting Penny to visit. Annie drove the little horse to appointments, while Martha stayed home to rest, her body no longer able to handle the frequent trips. "She's making a real difference," Annie reported after each visit. "The staff says kids who've been unresponsive for months light up when Penny arrives. One boy, completely nonverbal, laughed for the first time in his therapist's memory when Penny nuzzled his hand." The stories filled Martha with pride and something else. Validation, maybe. She'd been right to keep Penny out of the commercial circus, to focus on work that actually helped people. The money would have been nice, but this, knowing that Penny brought joy and healing to children who desperately needed it, this was wealth of a different kind. In late July, a letter arrived from a law firm in Nashville. Martha opened it with shaking hands, Annie looking over her shoulder. "Dear Mrs. Ray," Annie read aloud, "we represent the estate of Elizabeth Thornton, who passed away last month. In her will, Mrs. Thornton left you a sum of $15,000 with a note that reads, 'For Penny's care and for Martha's stubborn wisdom, I was wrong about what mattered.'" Martha sat down heavily, the letter fluttering to the table. $15,000, more money than she'd ever had in her life, and an apology of sorts from a woman who'd seen the truth before the end. "What are you going to do with it?" Annie asked. Martha thought about the leaking roof, the aging truck, the 100 small repairs the cabin and barn needed. She thought about security, about having a cushion against disaster. But she also thought about the children at Rebecca's facility, about others who might benefit from what Penny could offer. Half goes into savings, she decided. Real savings in a bank for emergencies. The other half goes to Rebecca's program. To buy equipment, improve facilities, maybe hire another therapist so they can help more kids. "Martha, you could use all of it yourself." "Could, but I don't need to. Penny and I, we've got what we need. Those kids don't." They drove to Rebecca's facility the next day to deliver the check. Rebecca wept when she saw the amount. "This is too much." "It's not nearly enough," Martha corrected. "But it's what I have to give." The donation transformed Rebecca's program. She expanded the barn, added proper equipment for different disabilities, hired a second therapist. The program went from serving a dozen children to serving 40. And Penny remained at the center of it all, the little horse who'd started everything. But success brought new challenges. The more visible the program became, the more attention it attracted. News stories, visitors, people wanting to replicate what Rebecca had built. And always, lurking in the background, were those who saw opportunity in a different sense. The man showed up in August, during one of Penny's therapy sessions. He watched from outside the fence, his expensive camera capturing image after image. Annie noticed him first. "Who's that?" Rebecca frowned. "I don't know, but I don't like it." The man approached as they were loading Penny back into the trailer. "Excuse me, are you Martha Ray?" Martha's guard went up immediately. "Who's asking?" "Gerald Price. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I'd like to make a film about Penny and the therapy program. Not interested. Please hear me out. This isn't about exploitation. It's about showing the world what you've accomplished here, inspiring other people to start similar programs. Think of all the children who could be helped." He was smooth, persuasive. Annie looked interested despite herself. Even Rebecca seemed intrigued, but Martha had heard similar pitches before. "I said no. Mrs. Ray, with all due respect, you're being short-sighted. This could help countless—" "Mr. Price," Martha cut him off, her voice hard. "I've heard this speech before. It's always about helping people, about the greater good. But somehow it always ends with someone making money off my horse. So no, final answer. Now please leave." He left, but his card remained in Annie's pocket. Martha saw it later, lying on the kitchen table. "Don't even think about it," Martha said. "He had a point, though. A documentary could really spread awareness." "Annie," Martha's tone made the younger woman stop mid-sentence. "I know you mean well, but I've lived longer than you, seen more people with good intentions that somehow turn bad. We're doing good work here, real work. We don't need cameras and attention to validate that. You're right. I'm sorry." But the conversation planted a seed of doubt in Martha's mind. Was she being stubborn, holding Penny back from a wider impact because of her own fears and prejudices? The question kept her awake that night, staring at the ceiling while Penny dozed in the barn. She thought about all the children Penny had helped. About Sophie, who'd taken her first unassisted steps with Penny by her side. About Marcus, the non-verbal boy who'd laughed. About dozens of others whose lives had been touched by the little horse's gentle presence. But she also thought about Tommy Pratt, about Rex the hunting dog, about all the times Penny had saved someone simply by being alert and caring. Those moments hadn't been documented or publicized. They'd just been acts of compassion, pure and simple. The next morning, Martha made a decision. She called Gerald Price. "Mr. Price, this is Martha Ray. I've reconsidered your offer, but I have conditions." "Name them." "You film what actually happens. No staging, no manufactured drama. You show the real work, the boring parts and the beautiful parts. And all profits from the film go to therapy programs like Rebecca's, not a penny to me or anyone connected to Penny." There was a pause. "That's unusual, Mrs. Ray. Most people want compensation. Most people aren't me." "Those are my terms. Take them or leave them." "I'll take them. When can we start?" The filming took 6 weeks. Gerald and his small crew became fixtures at the cabin and at Rebecca's facility. They captured Penny's daily routine, the therapy sessions, the quiet moments between Martha and the little horse. Gerald kept his word, showing everything honestly, including the hard parts. One particularly moving scene showed a session with a teenage girl who'd been in a severe accident. She'd lost the use of her legs and was deeply depressed, resistant to all therapy. When Penny was brought in, the girl initially refused to engage. "I don't want a pity pony," she snapped. But Penny, in her wisdom, simply stood by the girl's wheelchair, patient and calm. After several minutes, the girl reached out tentatively to touch the soft mane. Penny nickered quietly. "She knows," the girl whispered. "She knows what it's like to be broken." That moment, captured on film, would become one of the documentary's most powerful scenes. Because it was true. Penny had been broken, starved, abandoned, and she'd survived, thrived even. She was living proof that being broken didn't mean being finished. The documentary premiered at a film festival in October. Martha and Annie drove down to watch it with Rebecca and her family. Sitting in the dark theater, watching her life and Penny's story unfold on screen, Martha felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride, certainly, Gerald had done beautiful work, showing the truth without sentimentality or manipulation, but also vulnerability. Her life, her choices, her relationship with Penny, all of it was now public in a way it had never been before. The audience gave a standing ovation. Several people approached Martha afterward, tears in their eyes, thanking her for sharing Penny's story. One woman, probably in her 70s, grasped Martha's hands. "My grandson has autism. Watching this, seeing what that little horse did for those children, it gave me hope." "Thank you. Hope. That's what Penny gave people. Not through grand gestures or spectacular achievements, but through simple presence, through showing up day after day and offering unconditional acceptance." The documentary won awards. It aired on television, reaching millions of viewers. Donations poured into Rebecca's program and similar facilities across the country. The film sparked a movement, with dozens of new therapeutic horse programs starting up, modeled on what they'd seen in Gerald's documentary. And with the attention came something Martha had dreaded, a letter from the IRS. The amount she owed in back taxes, calculated from the prize money Penny had won in the show circuit and the various donations she'd received, came to nearly $8,000. Money she didn't have. She'd spent Elizabeth's bequest on Rebecca's program and basic living expenses. The savings she'd managed to accumulate wouldn't cover half the debt. "This can't be right," Annie said, staring at the letter. "You gave most of that money away. Doesn't matter. They consider it income, regardless of what I did with it." Martha called a tax attorney, using what little remained in her savings to pay for a consultation. The news wasn't good. "You should have been reporting this income all along," the attorney explained. "The fact that you didn't, even innocently, means penalties on top of the base amount. You're looking at closer to $10,000 once everything's calculated. I don't have $10,000. Then we need to work out a payment plan. Or," the attorney hesitated, "you could consider selling assets." "Do you own your property?" "It's been in my late husband's family for generations. I understand this is difficult, Mrs. Ray, but the IRS doesn't care about sentimental value. If you can't pay, they can force a sale." Martha left the attorney's office feeling hollowed out. She'd survived poverty, widowhood, isolation. She'd thought the worst was behind her. But now she faced losing the land Samuel's family had worked for over 100 years. The cabin where she'd lived most of her adult life, everything. That night, sitting in the barn with Penny, Martha wept for the first time since Samuel died. The little horse pressed close, offering what comfort she could. "I'm so tired," Martha whispered. "I thought we'd made it. Thought we were safe. But maybe Chester was right at that auction. Maybe you were the world's biggest mistake." She didn't mean it. Even drowning in despair, she didn't mean it. But the words hung in the air, heavy with defeat. Annie found her there an hour later. "I've been thinking," the young woman said. "What if we asked for help? Crowdfunding, maybe. People loved the documentary. They might be willing to contribute. I won't beg. It's not begging. It's accepting help from people who care about what you and Penny represent." Martha wanted to refuse. Pride demanded she refuse, but practicality and exhaustion won out. "Do what you think is best." Annie set up the crowdfunding page that night, explaining Martha's situation honestly. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours, they'd raised enough to cover the entire tax debt. Within a week, they'd raised double that amount. Martha watched the numbers climb with disbelief. Strangers from across the country, even from other countries, sending money to help an old woman and her horse. The messages that accompanied the donations brought her to tears. "Penny's story inspired me to adopt a rescue dog. My daughter has cerebral palsy. Watching the documentary gave us hope. You showed me that it's never too late to make a difference." When the campaign ended, Martha had enough to pay the tax debt and put a substantial amount into savings. But more than the money, she had something she'd lost: faith in humanity. Faith that people could be generous, kind, caring, without expecting anything in return. She called a meeting with Annie and Rebecca to discuss what to do with the excess funds. The answer came easily. They would start a foundation dedicated to supporting therapeutic animal programs across the country. The Penny Foundation, they called it, with the mission of making sure no program ever had to turn away a child due to lack of resources. "Are you sure?" Rebecca asked. "This is your money, Martha. You could use it for yourself. I'm 64 years old. My needs are simple, but there are thousands of children out there who need what Penny provides. This money can help them." The foundation launched in December, just over 2 years since Martha had bought Penny at that auction. The timing felt significant, cyclical. They'd come full circle, from desperation to hope, from isolation to community, from barely surviving to being able to help others survive. But the real twist came in January, when a registered letter arrived from a law firm in Kentucky. Martha opened it with Annie looking over her shoulder. As she read, her face went pale. "What is it?" Annie asked. Martha couldn't speak. She handed the letter to Annie, who read aloud. "Dear Mrs. Ray, we represent the estate of Harrison Cole, the journalist who first wrote about you and Penny. Mr. Cole passed away recently and left specific instructions regarding you in his will. Enclosed, you will find documentation proving that Penny is not, as believed, a common miniature horse, but rather a direct descendant of the Falabella line, one of the rarest and most valuable miniature horse bloodlines in the world." Annie paused, looking at Martha. "Do you know what this means?" Martha shook her head, still in shock. Annie continued reading. "According to Mr. Cole's research, Penny's parentage can be traced back to horses imported from Argentina in the 1980s by a breeder who subsequently went bankrupt. The horses were sold at auction, their provenance lost. Based on Penny's conformation, genetic markers, and distinctive characteristics, Mr. Cole hired an equine geneticist to conduct DNA testing. The results, enclosed, confirm Penny's heritage. Her value on the open market, given her bloodline, her proven temperament, and her fame, is conservatively estimated at $500,000. The silence in the cabin was absolute. $500,000. For the horse Martha had bought for 50 cents. "This is crazy," Annie finally said. $500,000. Martha found her voice. "Harrison never told me he was doing this research." "The letter says he wanted to be sure before he said anything. He died before he could contact you, so his attorneys are following his final instructions." Annie flipped to the attached documents. "Martha, this is all legitimate. DNA tests, pedigree documentation, expert valuations. Penny is literally a treasure." A treasure. The word felt wrong, uncomfortable. Penny wasn't a treasure. She was family. But the implications were staggering. With proper documentation of Penny's bloodline, they could breed her. Each foal would be worth tens of thousands of dollars. Martha could be wealthy beyond anything she'd ever imagined, or she could sell Penny outright to a collector or breeding program. Live comfortably for the rest of her life. Secure Annie's future. Endow the Penny Foundation with enough money to help children for generations. All she had to do was give up the little horse who'd saved her life in ways that had nothing to do with money. The offers started arriving within days of the news breaking. How the information leaked, Martha never learned, but suddenly everyone knew that the famous therapy horse was actually a rare Falabella. Breeding programs from Argentina, Dubai, and California sent representatives. Private collectors made increasingly absurd offers. One oil baron from Texas flew in personally to offer $750,000 cash. "Mrs. Ray," he said, standing in her modest cabin that suddenly felt impossibly small, "I have the finest equine facility in the Southwest. Penny would want for nothing. The best food, veterinary care, a climate-controlled barn. And you'd be wealthy beyond your dreams." "She doesn't want a climate-controlled barn," Martha said quietly. "She wants to be here, doing the work she loves." "Be reasonable. You're not getting any younger. What happens to her when you're gone? At least with me, you'd know she's cared for." After he left, Martha sat on her porch watching Penny graze in the meadow. The little horse looked up occasionally, as if checking to make sure Martha was still there. The trust in that gesture broke Martha's heart. Annie sat down beside her. "You're not seriously considering selling her, are you?" "I'm considering what's best for her. What if something happens to me?" "You're young, Annie, but you have your own life to live." You won't want to be stuck here forever caring for a horse. That's my decision to make, not yours. Is it fair, though, to ask that of you? You're not asking. I'm offering. There's a difference. They sat in silence as the sun set behind the mountains. Martha thought about the past 2 years, about how much her life had changed because of one impulsive decision at an auction. She'd expected to save Penny. Instead, Penny had saved her, given her purpose, community, hope. How did you put a price on that? But the practical voice in her head, the voice that had kept her alive through hard times, whispered different questions. What about Annie's future? What about the Penny Foundation, which could help thousands of children with adequate funding? What about being responsible, sensible, realistic? I need to think, Martha said finally. Really think about what's right. The next week was torture. Martha barely slept, barely ate. She spent hours in the barn with Penny, trying to imagine life without the little horse. The cabin would feel empty again, silent, but Penny would be safe, cared for by people with resources Martha would never have. Rebecca came to visit, having heard about the offers through the community grapevine. She found Martha in the barn, as usual. "Talk to me," Rebecca said, sitting on the hay bale beside Martha. "I don't know what to do." "Yes, you do. You're just afraid to admit it." Martha looked at her friend. "What would you do?" "I'd ask myself what Penny wants. Not what I want, not what makes financial sense. What does she want? She's a horse. She doesn't want anything except food and safety. You know that's not true. You've seen how she responds to the children, how she lights up during therapy sessions. She has preferences, desires, joy. What brings her joy, Martha?" Martha closed her eyes, seeing Penny with the children. The gentle way she approached each one, adapting to their needs. The brightness in her eyes during those sessions. The contentment afterward, as if she knew she'd done something important. Helping people brings her joy. And would she be helping people in some collector's barn, being used for breeding? She'd be creating more horses like her. Her foals could help people. Could. Or they could be sold to the highest bidder, scattered across the world, never fulfilling their potential. You can't control what happens to them. Rebecca was right, and Martha knew it. But the pressure of the offers, the weight of financial security, the responsibility of making the right choice, it all pressed down on her until she could barely breathe. That night, alone in the cabin, Martha pulled out the worn half-dollar coin she'd kept all this time. The 50 cents that had bought Penny. She turned it over in her fingers, remembering that day at the auction. Remembering the decision that had seemed so foolish. The decision that had changed everything. She'd made that choice based on heart, not head, against all logic and practicality. And it had been the right choice, the best choice she'd ever made. Maybe it was time to trust her heart again. Morning came clear and cold. Martha made her decision before breakfast, before doubt could creep back in. She called the law firm handling the offers and informed them she was declining all proposals to sell Penny. "Mrs. Ray, are you certain? Some of these offers are extremely generous, I'm certain. What about breeding rights? Several programs have expressed interest in purchasing foals." Martha thought about that. It was a middle ground, a compromise. Penny could stay with her, but her foals could bring in income. Except breeding took a toll on mares. Required facilities Martha didn't have, brought complications she didn't want. No breeding. "Penny stays here with me doing the work she loves." That's final. After hanging up, Martha felt lighter than she had in weeks. She'd chosen love over money, relationship over security. It was foolish, impractical, and absolutely right. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't done testing her. 2 weeks later, during a routine therapy session at Rebecca's facility, Penny collapsed. One moment she was walking beside a young boy, patient and steady as always. The next, her legs buckled and she went down hard. The boy screamed. Rebecca rushed over. Annie, who'd been watching from nearby, got to Penny first. "Call the vet!" she shouted. Now. Dr. Harrison arrived within 30 minutes, but it felt like hours. He examined Penny carefully while Martha stood by, feeling helpless and terrified. The little horse's breathing was labored, her eyes dull with pain. "I need to run tests," Harrison said finally. "But my initial assessment is colic. Severe colic. She needs surgery, Martha, soon. How soon? Today, within hours. How much will it cost? Harrison hesitated. With surgery, hospital stay and recovery, probably around $8,000. Maybe more if there are complications. $8,000. Martha had that now, thanks to the crowdfunding campaign. But it was earmarked for the foundation, for helping other programs. Using it for Penny's surgery would deplete the fund before it even got started. Do it, Martha said without hesitation. Whatever she needs, do it. They transported Penny to Harrison's veterinary hospital in town. The surgery took 4 hours. Martha sat in the waiting room the entire time, Annie beside her, both of them silent with worry. Harrison emerged finally, still in his surgical scrubs. She made it through. But the next 48 hours are critical. If she survives that, she should make a full recovery. Should. Not will. Martha heard the uncertainty in his voice. They let her see Penny briefly. The little horse lay on her side in a large recovery stall, sedated and weak. Martha knelt beside her, stroking the soft nose, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed. You have to fight, girl. You're a fighter. You've always been a fighter. Penny's eye opened slightly, focusing on Martha's face. In that moment, Martha saw not a valuable bloodline or a therapy animal or a local legend. She saw her friend, her companion, the creature who taught her that connection matters more than survival, that love is the only real security. Please don't leave me, Martha whispered. I'm not ready. The next 2 days were the longest of Martha's life. She stayed at the hospital, sleeping in a chair beside Penny's stall. Annie brought food and changes of clothes. Rebecca visited daily, bringing updates about the children, asking about Penny. On the second night, Penny's fever spiked. Harrison worked through the night, administering antibiotics and fluids, fighting the infection that threatened to kill her. By dawn, he was exhausted and Martha was beyond despair. I've done everything I can, Harrison said gently. The rest is up to her. Martha sat with Penny's head in her lap, stroking her mane, talking to her about everything and nothing. About the day they met, about the blizzard and Tommy Pratt, about all the children whose lives she'd touched, about how much she mattered, how much she was loved. You can't give up, Martha said, tears streaming down her face. I didn't give up on you at that auction, and you can't give up now. We're a team, remember? We save each other. As if in response, Penny's breathing steadied. The labored gasps became more even, deeper. Her eyes opened fully for the first time in 2 days, clear and aware. That's it, Martha encouraged. That's my girl. Come back to me. By afternoon, Penny was standing. By evening, she was eating. Harrison called it remarkable. Martha called it a miracle. Annie called it the power of love, and maybe she was right. Penny's recovery took 6 weeks. Martha brought her home to the mountain as soon as Harrison cleared her for travel. The little horse seemed happy to be back, exploring the familiar meadow with obvious pleasure despite her lingering weakness. But the medical crisis had consequences beyond Penny's health. The surgery and recovery had cost $12,000, more than Harrison's initial estimate due to complications. Martha had used the foundation's entire starting fund, plus most of her personal savings. They were back to barely getting by. Worse word of Penny's illness had spread. New offers arrived, but these were different. Collectors who'd been interested before now saw an opportunity. A valuable horse with health problems, owned by an elderly woman with limited resources. They made offers framed as rescue missions. Let us take her, they said. Give her the care she deserves. You've done your best, but she needs more than you can provide. The words cut deep because part of Martha feared they were true. What if Penny got sick again? What if something happened that Martha couldn't afford to fix? Was keeping Penny an act of love or selfishness? Annie found her crying in the barn one evening, these doubts finally overwhelming her. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing anymore, Martha confessed. Maybe Penny would be better off somewhere else. Somewhere with resources and professional care. Do you really believe that? I don't know what I believe. I'm tired, Annie, so tired. Annie sat beside her on the hay bale. You know what I believe? I believe Penny chose you just as much as you chose her. Not because you had money or resources, but because you saw her when no one else did. Because you gave her love when the world gave her nothing. That bond doesn't break just because things get hard. But what if I can't take care of her properly? Then we'll figure it out together. That's what family does. Family. The word resonated. Martha had lost her blood family, had spent years thinking she'd finish her life alone. But somehow she'd built a new family. Annie, Rebecca, even Penny. They'd created something that mattered. The next morning brought unexpected news. Gerald Price, the documentary filmmaker, called. "Martha, I've been following the situation. The surgery, the financial strain. I'd like to help. Gerald, I appreciate the thought, but hear me out. The documentary has been incredibly successful. It's won awards, been sold to streaming platforms, aired internationally. There's been significant income from it. According to our agreement, all profits go to therapy programs. But I've been thinking, what if we expanded that definition? I don't understand. Penny is the heart of those therapy programs. Keeping her healthy, keeping her working, that is, supporting the mission. I'd like to establish a care fund specifically for Penny, not charity, Martha. This is money the documentary earned because of her story. It belongs to her in a way." Martha wanted to refuse. Pride demanded she refuse. But she thought about what Annie had said about family, about accepting help when it was offered with genuine care. How much are we talking about?" "Enough to cover her medical expenses, her care, and provide you with a modest salary for the work you do. You've been volunteering your time and Penny's services for years. That should be compensated. I don't do this for money. I know. But you shouldn't have to choose between helping people and surviving. Let me set this up, please." Martha agreed, and within a week the Penny Care Fund was established. It didn't make her wealthy, but it provided security. She could afford to keep Penny healthy, fed, and working without constant financial terror. But the greatest challenge was still ahead. In late spring, Rebecca called with news. A national network wanted to do a special about therapeutic animal programs. They wanted to feature Penny prominently, film her working with children, interview Martha about their journey. It would be incredible exposure for the foundation, Rebecca said. Could inspire hundreds of new programs, raise millions in donations. Or it could turn Penny into a celebrity again. Bring more pressure, more offers, more chaos. That's a risk, Rebecca admitted. But think about the children who could be helped, the programs that could be funded. We have a chance to make a real difference, Martha. A lasting difference. Martha struggled with the decision for days. She'd learned to be wary of attention, of people who wanted to use Penny for their own purposes. But this was different. This was Rebecca, someone she trusted, asking her to help further a cause they both believed in. She finally said yes with conditions. Limited filming, no disruption to Penny's regular therapy schedule. Focus on the children and the work, not on Martha or Penny's monetary value. The network agreed. The filming took place over 3 weeks in June. The production crew was professional and respectful, but Martha still found the process exhausting. Cameras everywhere, people constantly asking questions, Penny having to repeat actions for different angles. But then she watched Penny work with the children, and she remembered why she'd agreed. There was Michael, age 7, who'd been in a car accident that left him with severe PTSD. He couldn't be in vehicles, couldn't be around strangers, spent most of his time in silent terror. But when Rebecca introduced him to Penny, something shifted. The little horse approached slowly, as she always did with frightened children. She let Michael set the pace, never pushing. After 30 minutes, Michael touched her nose. After an hour, he was walking beside her. By the end of the session, he was smiling. She understands, Michael's mother wept. She understands what he's been through. The cameras captured it all. And Martha felt the invasion was worth it if it meant other children like Michael might get help. There was Emma, a teenager with an eating disorder, who'd lost all interest in life. She sat slumped in her wheelchair, unresponsive to therapists, to family, to everyone. Until Penny, the little horse, did something unexpected. She brought Emma an apple from the bucket, holding it in her teeth, offering it. Emma stared at the apple, at Penny's patient eyes, and something broke inside her. She took the apple. Didn't eat it, not yet, but she held it. It was a start. There was David, non-verbal and autistic, who'd never made eye contact with anyone. But he looked at Penny, really looked, studying her face with intense focus. And then, miracle of miracles, he spoke. Horse, he said. One word, but it was everything. His parents collapsed in tears. The therapist stood in stunned silence. And Penny, understanding somehow that something significant had happened, gently nuzzled the boy's hand. Martha watched these moments unfold, the cameras documenting each one, and she understood something profound. This was Penny's purpose. Not winning shows, not producing valuable offspring, not making anyone wealthy. This, connecting with broken people and helping them heal. The special aired in September, 3 years after Martha had bought Penny at that auction. Millions of people watched. The response was overwhelming. Donations to the Penny Foundation exploded. Therapeutic riding programs across the country reported surges in funding and volunteers. The movement they'd started had become something bigger than any of them had imagined. But with the attention came renewed pressure. More offers for Penny, more people wanting access to her, more demands on her time and energy. Martha found herself fighting constantly to protect Penny from being overworked, to maintain the balance between helping others and preserving the little horse's well-being. It came to a head in October when a wealthy philanthropist offered to fund a national therapeutic riding program, with Penny as the flagship animal. The offer included a multi-million-dollar facility, professional staff, and resources to help thousands of children annually. All you have to do is donate Penny to the program, the representative explained. She'd be the centerpiece, the inspiration, and you could visit her any time you wanted. Visit her. Not live with her, not be her family. Just visit. Martha knew what she had to do. She called a press conference, something she'd never done before. Media from across the state showed up, curious about what the reclusive widow might announce. Annie stood beside her for support. Rebecca was there, as was Gerald Price. Even Dr. Harrison came, closing his practice for the afternoon. Martha stood before the microphones, Penny beside her, and spoke from her heart. 3 years ago, I spent my last 50 cents on a horse nobody wanted. I was lonely, poor, and probably not thinking clearly. Everyone said I'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe I had. But that mistake saved my life. Not financially. Not in any way the world values. She saved my life by giving me purpose, by showing me that connection matters more than survival. That love is the only real wealth. I've been offered a lot of money for Penny, more money than I ever imagined having. I've been offered opportunities that could help thousands of children, and those offers are tempting. But here's what I've learned. Penny helps people not because she's valuable, but because she's present. Because she shows up day after day and offers herself without reservation. You can't mass-produce that. You can't franchise it. It only works because it's real, because it's built on relationship, not transaction. So I'm announcing today that Penny will never be sold. She'll never be donated to an institution. She's not for sale, not for breeding, not for anything. She's my family, and she'll stay with me for as long as we both live. The press conference made national news. Some people understood. Others, called Martha selfish, accused her of holding back progress, of choosing personal attachment over the greater good. She read the criticism and felt the weight of it, but she didn't waver, because she'd learned something that the critics hadn't. Sometimes the greatest good comes from small acts of love, repeated daily, with no agenda beyond presence and care. Life settled into a new rhythm. Martha was 65 now, moving slower, feeling her age more acutely. But Annie was there to help, and together they maintained Penny's therapy schedule without overwhelming her. Twice a week at Rebecca's facility, occasional visits to other programs, and the rest of the time just being home on the mountain. The Penny Foundation thrived under Annie's management, funding programs across the country. They didn't try to replicate Penny. Instead, they supported people who were doing similar work with their own animals, in their own communities, building authentic relationships. On a quiet evening in late autumn, Martha sat on her porch with Penny grazing nearby. Annie had gone to town for supplies. The mountain was silent except for the wind in the pines and the distant call of a hawk. Martha thought about the journey that had brought her here. The grief, the loneliness, the moment of impulse at an auction that changed everything. She thought about all the people who'd tried to tell her what Penny was worth, what she should do, what made sense. None of them had understood that Penny's worth wasn't measured in dollars or impact or legacy. Her worth was in the relationship they shared, in the quiet moments of connection, in the way they'd saved each other when both needed saving. The half-dollar coin still sat on Martha's dresser, a reminder of where they'd started. 50 cents and a leap of faith. It hadn't made her a millionaire, not in money, but in the ways that mattered, in the wealth that couldn't be counted or spent or taken away. She was richer than she'd ever imagined possible. Penny lifted her head from grazing and walked over to the porch, resting her nose on Martha's knee. The little horse's eyes held that familiar intelligence, that spark of spirit Martha had seen 3 years ago at the auction. "We did good, didn't we, girl?" Martha said softly. Penny nickered in response, and Martha chose to believe it was agreement. They sat together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. An old woman and a small horse, both of them rescued, both of them healers, both of them exactly where they belonged. Martha had started with nothing but a dream that love might be enough. Penny had taught her it was more than enough. It was everything. The world would keep spinning, keep measuring worth in ways Martha didn't understand or agree with. But here on this mountain, in this moment, with this remarkable creature by her side, Martha had everything she needed. She'd gambled her last 50 cents on a horse nobody wanted, and in return, she'd received a fortune beyond measure. Not in the form the world expected, but in the only form that truly mattered. A life filled with purpose, connection, and love.